Hi, today I would like to talk about IELTS writing. First of all, I'd like to talk about the exam formats, then I'll move on to talk about Task 1 and Task 2. So in IELTS writing, you have 60 minutes to finish 2 tasks. In Task 1, you have to write a descriptive report of a table or a diagram, which is 150 words. In Task 2, you should spend 40 minutes on writing a 250 words essay in response to an opinion or a problem. Now let's talk about Task 1. So there are 4 main criteria in Task 1, like using a wide range of vocabulary with very natural and sophisticated control of lexical features, and you should use a wide range of structures with full flexibility and accuracy. I will provide these kind of structure later. So in Task 1, you have to interpret a diagram or table and present the information in your own words. So these are the samples, and now let's move on to an example task. So this graph below shows the different modes of transport used to travel to and from work in one European city in 1950, 1960, and 1990. And then there are some tips for you to finish this task. First of all, you should identify the main trends for each mode, like bus, car, bike, and food. And then you should identify any large increases or decreases. Also, are there any clear and consistent directions? Does anything seem surprising? Are there any clear relationships between modes or percentages? So the first step is that you can see that the graph shows the percentage of travelers in a European city who used bus, car, bike, and food to commute to and from work in years 1950, 1970s, and 1990. This could be your introduction. So for the first paragraph, you can say the amount of people using cars grew considerably, rising from just over 5% in 1950 to 25% in 1970, and then climbing to almost 40% by 1990. And then you may talk about other items that show an increase and decreased trend. For example, you may say that however, the amount of people using bikes decreased. Over 25% of commuters cycled in 1950, but this had fallen to less than 10% by 1990. Similarly, the amount of people who walked to work fell from more than a foot in 1950 to about 10% in 1990. Also, you may talk about buses. For example, you may say the amount of people using buses initially rose in 1970 to about 30%, but had dropped to about 70% by 1990. So for the conclusion, you may say the graph indicates the growing use of cars for commuting and the corresponding fall in the popularity of other modes of transport since 1950. So this is the summary, and then you can see that I actually use some action verbs like grew, fallen, dropped, and rose. These are really powerful verbs. And then you may see that I actually use some adverbs to show the scales of increasing or decreasing trend. And then I also use some nice vocabulary like rising from just 5%, and then you can see that I'm really concrete by quoting the data. So here comes some useful phrases. For example, instead of saying increase, you may say leaped, bumped, escalated, or climbed to. So these are some useful phrases. For decrease, you may say decline to, slump to, sink, or these are actually verbs. You may say it witnessed a fall. So you may also use them in your essay. However, if you describe something really unstable, you may say like, before soaring to a staggering 46 million in 2005, the rate of something has fluctuated. You may also say that it is unstable around something and so on. But be careful that most of the time you have to use past tense because most of the data are in the past. Also, if something is really stable, you may say something stay constant at a particular point. And remember to quote the data. So here comes a lot of useful phrases. Also, when you talk about the data, you may use some adverbs like it is approximately about 5% and so on. And then these adverbs are really useful because they tell you how they increased or decreased. For example, you may say the rate of something increased enormously, and this adverb actually tells you precisely how the rate has changed. Also, for the introduction, you may say that a glance at the annotated table reveals that something happened, and then you may use this kind of verbs to describe in your introduction. And then these are also very beautiful adjectives to describe the trend. Also, for describing years, you may say by 205 it has reached, and so on. You may use these useful phrases in describing the years. Also, sometimes the data may include some projections of data. So you may say it is predicted that something will happen. And then for quoting data, you may use this kinds of statistics, this kinds of useful phrases. For example, you may say that the rates of driving cars stood at 15%. And then you may also rank your data by saying that something comes the first and then something comes in the second by using these kinds of phrases. You may also compare and contrast the data. For example, you may say there's a huge difference between A and B. And then you can also compare the similarities between different data. And then you can also say compare the data by saying the birth rate peaked at 5%, but it have reached high peak of 60% in 2005. Moreover, sometimes you may actually see that something have increased really drastically, and then you may say this country saw a double-fold increase in something, and then threefold actually means 3 times. And then you may also say that if something has bounced back, it actually means that it was falling, but it suddenly increased drastically, and then you may say bounce back. Okay, now let's move on to task 2. So in task 2, I suggest you spend 40 minutes on it, and then you have to justify your opinion, compare and contrast evidence, and evaluate and challenge ideas. So these are the 4 criteria in your task 2. It's really similar with task 1. So I would like you to look at this example. Some business now say that no one can smoke cigarettes in any of their office. Some governments have banned smoking in all public places. This is a good idea, but it takes away some of our freedom. Do you agree or disagree? So for this example, I think you should actually use this plan. For example, you should write down some of the useful vocabulary first, and then you may write down some of the examples like research, survey, quotes, news, statistics, and so on. And then you may write some useful sentence patterns beside it. I think it would help you to write your essay in a quicker way. And then I would like to share some useful sentence patterns for you. So you may use some conjunctions and then clap sentence as well. And clap sentence are like it is important to do something and so on. And then you should also use conditional sentences, like the 4 types of conditional sentence. But due to time limits, I may not talk about these sentence patterns really I will not talk about them in detail, so please refer to my another video which is about about a sentence pattern. And then you may also use participial phrase, prepositional phrase, relative clause, gerund and true infinitives, and interrupters. I will show you more examples in another video. And then there are also some functional sentence patterns, like along with the advance of society, more and more problems are brought to our attention, one of which is that. And then these are some useful cant phrases, and then you may put your issue in on the blank. Now I'd like to tell you how to write an introduction. So there are actually 7 strategies if you don't count this one. So the first and then for the first one, it is like from general to specific. And then as you can see from this example, I actually move from something about stray pets to animal cruelty. So you can see that I actually talk about the background in detail first. And then the second strategy is the use of rhetorical questions. You can see that there are loads of questions here. And then these are used to evoke the thinking of the reader. And then you can also see that what is wrong with Hong Kong, it is another example of rhetorical question. Moreover, I may use some narratives. For example, you can see that I talk about some stories about teenage pregnancy here. And then you can see that I actually use this story to attract the attention of readers. Also, I may use another funny story, like I use the story of Peter Lee here to show that child abuse is really common. Or you may say it's an imagined scenario, so it's different from this one. Moreover, I actually compare and contrast the time. As you can see from this example, you may see that I actually contrast Chinese folks with the present situation here about family. And then you may also talk about the importance in your introduction. For example, you may talk about the seriousness of drug abuse on economy, and that can actually attract the attention of your reader. And the final one is the use of statistics. It could be really powerful if you can use them properly, but I'm not quite sure whether you can remember that in your exam. But if not, I think you may give us a rough number, and then it can become persuasive. Now I'd like to tell you how to develop your paragraphs. So according to this website, actually there are 16 strategies, but as times are limited, I won't talk detail in in this video, and I will talk about it in detail in another video. But I would like to remind you that you may talk about definitions, comparison, addition, examples, evidence, and description. So for the thinking frameworks of task 2, actually you can think about who, where, when, and what. And then you may also, if you have to talk about the cause of a particular issue, you may talk about the economic, social, cultural, political, moral, and religious aspects of the issue. And then you may talk about the impact in positive or negative way. Also, when it comes to solution, you may talk about different stakeholders like government, school, or non-government organization. Now, let's talk about some common errors in IELTS writing task 2. For example, you may have loads of run-on sentence. What is run-on sentence? Run-on sentence means that you use a lot of comma and then you don't change the tense properly. And then another example is passive voice. Passive voice is quite tricky when you don't have time to recheck your composition because you will forget to change the tense. And there are more examples like existential there, dangling modifiers, conjunctions, relative clauses, uncountable nouns, inversion, and conditional sentences. For existential there, the problem is that your Cantonese language may affect you, and then you may say there has many apples. That would be wrong. And then for dangling modifiers, you may get it wrong because you may actually use this participial phrase to modify the apples, which is wrong. And then for conjunctions is actually you should actually add that between every clause or sentences. Between every sentences, so that it would be more grammatically correct. And then for relative clauses, sometimes you should use it because it's a really useful sentence pattern as well. Also, as there is no countable and countable nouns in Cantonese, it will be confusing if you do not use countables or uncountable nouns correctly. So remember to recheck your essay. And then for inversion, sometimes you may forget to reverse the modal verbs and the adverb. And then for conditional sentence, sometimes maybe you will use the tense wrongly, so you should be careful. And then I'd like to talk about some useful sentence patterns. So due to time limits, I may not have enough time to go through every sentence pattern, but you may use these prepositional phrases and use the phrase when it comes to, and it may be useful. And then you may use cleft sentence like here. And then this is one of the examples about obesity, and then I have a video about obesity, so please refer to that video. And then when it comes to reasons, you may use this kind of sentence patterns as well. And then you may use, it goes without saying that to talk about to emphasize a particular point. And then for talking examples, you may say for instance, and then you may say take something for example. And then for counter argument, I think it's important for you to raise an argument first, and then you have evidence to refute it. So these are some useful sentence patterns. And then you may also compare the advantages and disadvantages of something and tell the difference between A and B. And then for talking about suggestions, I think you should talk about it from different perspectives. For example, you may use the government should take a hard line against child abuse. And you may also use the sentence pattern like implement severe crackdown on drug abuse and so on. And these are really useful. and then the government can do something positive and something negative, and then these phrases are really useful as well. Apart from the government, the public should also do something. For example, when it comes to some elderly issue, you may say that the public or the family should treat the elderly with respect, and then you may use this for your topic sentence, and then after that you may talk about your effectiveness. Like with the above due efforts, the issues of something can be solved. So when it comes to suggestions, I think you should use those useful phrases as your topic sentence, and then you will tell us when to do that, where to do that, and why to do that, and then you talk about the feasibility, advantages, and how would you solve the disadvantage, and how it can address the core issue. And then I'd like to introduce some useful connectives for you. And then I think you may use something however very frequently, but I think that there are loads of synonyms. As you can see, you may use despite in spite of this, but be careful, you should use a noun after despite, and then you may also use aside from that to replace also. You may also use these kinds of beautiful connectives like otherwise, and then you can use for instance to replace for example. And then there are many ways to talk about in conclusion. And then you can see that from this website there is a very useful there is a contrast between using conjunction and not using conjunction, and it's really useful. So what are conjunctions? So basically you can use this acronym to remember that: fanboys, for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And you may also use this acronym on a whiteboard to remember all the subordinate conjunctions, and then I'll talk about them in detail in another video. So these are some examples of using conjunctions. Now I'd like to talk about how to write about conclusions. So there are basically three ways. So the first way is to summarize the viewpoints clearly, and the second way is that you actually talk about some thought-provoking questions. For example, it talks about something about whether beach is good for swimming. So whether shark hunting is good or not. And then you may also have some predictions. For example, if you don't treat pets better, maybe they would not. Maybe it's not that good. So actually, we should do something. So it's your wish. Thank you.